Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I will present today our work on exploring the use of deep learning for semantic segmentation of plants in 3D space. So for my PhD, I generally work on 3D perception for agricultural robots. And as you can imagine, the agricultural sector is already pretty mechanized, but right now we're facing a range of both old and new challenges, including needing to feed a growing population while also dealing with labor shortages at the same time, and also a growing pressure to reduce the environmental impact of the farming operations. And one promising strategy to address these challenges and some more is to move away from the heavy machinery, which also puts massive stress on the soils, and transitioning to a new generation of smart and flexible, more lightweight machines like these robots here. And then the idea is that these smaller machines will not only reduce the soil compaction, that they can also increase flexibility in how we farm the available land, how we make the most of the land as available. So if you imagine, for example, a team of these autonomous robots could potentially go around the farm, monitor the crop, determine where in the field treatments are necessary, and then deliver precision care tuned to the needs of individual plants. So that's the vision basically for the future. And for most tasks that any robot could perform in the field, is crucial first that the robot can evaluate the 3D morphology of plants. So as a first step toward that, we are looking at the problem of automatically segmenting 3D scans of plants into their different organs. Specifically, we want to identify regions of soil, stems, and leaves, as is illustrated here by the different colors. So this has been a known problem for a while, and there are some existing algorithms already in place for this segmentation problem. However, they are very elaborate procedures. They rely very heavily on manually tuned filters and controlled laboratory environments. And while they are very effective in the labs, they don't generally translate very well into the field, and they don't generate to natural variations in the crop or even to new species. And this all really limits their applicability outside of the lab. So in this study I'm presenting today, we wanted to investigate, can we use a supervised machine learning algorithm instead to tackle this problem? The basic idea is to train a neural network to predict the per point semantic annotations directly from the point cloud data without any need for explicit tuning. And we know from the 2D domain that deep learning is already kind of the standard approach to semantic segmentation of two-dimensional image data. And now with the introduction of novel network architectures such as PointNet++, some of that success has been translated into 3D space as well. So unlike convolutional networks, for example, that really rely on the ordered spatial grid pattern of 2D images, PointNet++ is specifically designed around the irregular and unordered format of point cloud inputs without needing to discretize them into like a grid representation. Now, I don't want to go too much into detail here, but just briefly, PointNet++ is a network architecture which extracts and then later aggregates features at different scales in the point cloud. So starting with a small local neighborhood, the network learns to select a sparse set of points from the neighborhood, which are informative points and summarize the local shape particularly well. And then repeatedly moves on to consider larger but sparser regions in the point cloud. Those are called abstraction levels. And then later on, through a series of interpolation steps, it aggregates the features extracted at the different scales back into a single feature vector, which could then be used for segmentation. This architecture, introduced in 2017, has since been successfully applied to many different applications. However, they are mainly focused on rigid man-made objects or very structured environments. And there's very little work yet on plants or any natural scenery, really. And that's not least because they require large annotated data sets. And especially in agricultural applications, we still lack those suitable training data sets. So especially because annotation in 3D is really very laborious task. So we don't really have suitable data sets just yet. So for this study, instead, we procedurally generated a synthetic data set of tomato plants and then we recorded point clouds of those synthetic tomato plants in simulation, mimicking the perspective that an RGBD sensor mounted to a robot in the field would have of the plants, including different viewing angles and realistic occlusion patterns. So here on the right, you can see 3 examples of what the point clouds look like, including different perspectives and occlusion patterns. So in this way, we created a set of 1,500 fully annotated point clouds in total, 1,052 of which were used for training purposes only. And it's maybe important to note here that these point clouds are really a single view only at each time. There's no stitching involved at this time. So the network we then trained on this synthetic data is the PointNet++ architecture adjusted for point-wise segmentation, fully with the original parameters that were introduced in the paper cited below. So once trained, we performed a quantitative evaluation using more of our synthetic data. And on that, overall, the network achieves a mean intersection over union ratio of 0.712, which, just to put that into context, is roughly comparable to the performance of the same network in some other applications. So let's take a closer look now, because if we look at the IUU scores of each of the individual semantic classes, we can see that the network actually produced excellent segmentation results for the soil and for the leaf classes, but it struggles a little bit with the stems, with detecting the stems. So for some context, I'm now showing one of the actual segmentation outputs that the network created on the left, along with the ground truth point cloud in the center. And then on the right, I've included a visualization where I've highlighted only the points that were misclassified by the network. So in general, the segmentation masks do look very similar. So the network clearly distinguishes soil and leaves very well. And we can also see that the network has developed a concept of what a stem is, because if you look at the large parts of the main spine of the stem, they have been detected correctly. And we saw that in most of the test examples. However, all of those stems, the smaller regions that are highlighted in red on the right side, they were falsely labeled as leaf regions, so stems mistaken for leaves. And this is also reflected in this lower IUU score for the stem class. So in particular, the network was kind of too conservative in assigning the stem label, and it over predicted the leaf label. We think this might be due to 2 reasons. Well, firstly, maybe the fine grained structure, the stems are very small. They're just simply more difficult to segment. But we also think there was likely an effect that the much smaller stem regions were underrepresented during training, which is just due to the views that we capture. They naturally include much larger regions of soils and leaves than stems. So during training, they will be seen by the network fewer times. So to counteract this class imbalance effect, we introduced a sample weight to the loss function so that a higher relative importance was placed on the underrepresented stem points during training. However, we found that this weighted loss did not really significantly influence the network performance. So in future iterations of this work, we'll definitely have to explore some other data augmentation strategies or some strategies to tackle this imbalance. So these are the quantitative results, but maybe more importantly, we've now validated our results on some real-world data. So we have applied the network that was trained purely in simulation to these real scans of 2 tomato plants on the left and also 1 maize plant that you can see on the right. And the results came out very similar to what we already observed in simulation. So again, we get really precise segmentation on the leaves and the soil, and even the main location of the spine of the stem was found. However, again, large parts of the stems have been misclassified as leaves. So we think this suggests that the learned concepts about shape did transfer to the real world data, even when we consider that the data we're using here was recorded with a different sensor setup at a different scale and resolution. And we've even included a different species here, and yet the learned concepts hold up. So we acknowledge that there is definitely room for improvement, especially with the STEM class, but in general, the network did learn to produce sensible annotations. And we believe that the network learned to segment leaf, soil, and even the stems based on structural data only. We also clearly observed some knowledge transfer when presented with some new scene configurations and even with the new real world data and the new species. So we believe both of these points are very promising indicators to support our idea that machine learning approach can increase generalizability and it is actually a promising alternative to the current state-of-the-art methods that we have. So the significance of the study, I think, is limited by the data that we use in a way. So the logical next step for us will have to be further testing with a suitably large real world data set for training as well, not just for testing. And we will still, with the real world data set, still encounter the issues of an inherent class balance, but we believe we can address that with both data augmentation strategies or also tweaks to the network itself to place more relative importance on local shape rather than global shape, maybe to highlight those fine-grained structures. We are also really interested in exploring how generalizable this algorithm is in practice. So for example, how much additional data do we have to use to apply the pre-trained network to a completely new crop or maybe a new environment? And finally, we would also like to explore some alternative network architectures. So for example, in the paper that I've pasted in here, an RGBD sensor was used, which produces a point cloud, but at the sensor level, the recorded data can also be represented as a depth image or a depth map. And because the data is captured from a single point of view with the help of projected light, the recorded data also kind of forms an image grid in this depth map representation, which the authors then exploit to allow for the use of CNNs even in 3D space. So this could be very interesting to explore. And then finally, we're also preparing to collect some new real world data sets with some new sensor equipment that we just got last week. So this is a brand new scan that I just recorded last week. And as you can see here, this is no longer a single view of the plant. This is already a registered scene. So we have a more complete 3D model of the plant. So we want to start experimenting with segmenting the whole plant as a complete model rather than single views of it, which theoretically the .NET++ architecture as we're using it right now also does allow for this. So we're very interested in exploring this further. So with this, I thank you all for listening and I'll happily answer some questions.
Thank you, Karoline, for the presentation. Really nice. I haven't received any questions yet from the participants, so I will encourage you. Just a reminder, you don't have to wait till the end. You can just post it and I will receive it here. So yeah, if you come up during the presentation, you can just type it in. In the meanwhile, I have some questions for you, Carolina. One of them is, I'm interested, for example, at the beginning, like while you were creating this data set, in your case, it was tomato plants, if I remember well.
Yeah.
How easy, like for me, will be to create another data set from another type of plant, and what will be the constraints if I want to do that?
Right. So in general, I think it would be very easy to translate this to different species. So if you look at the paper, we also give a bit more of the details about how this data set was created. So we used an algorithm that was originally intended for tree branching structures, but it's very customizable. So we just defined the stereotypical model of a tomato plant, and then you can vary all the descriptors like the length, the width, all the different angles, and procedurally generate as many plants as you want from that. And that description is pretty open. So you could go, I've seen people use it to do wheat plants that are very different, have very different morphology from the plants we use here, or trees. There's a lot of range where you could use this.
Okay.
I will say that the plant models that came out, they are not as detailed as, for example, this real plant we're looking at here. So the leaf shape is very restricted. It doesn't have any of the grooves or ridges. Yeah. It's just a general shape.
Thank you. Yeah, we have more questions now. Have 4 of them. I don't know if we're going to be able to answer all of them, but I'll go first first come, first serve. Taeyeon Choi is asking, will occlusion matter in accuracy? If so, how much in your experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So from for this study specifically, we used 3 different viewing angles. So one was straight top down, and then one at 20 degrees and one at 40 degrees off of the main axis. And for those different views, we didn't find any significant differences in the viewing angle. However, I think that's slightly different from what you're asking. Sometimes if there is more or less occlusion, it doesn't really correlate with the viewing angle. So maybe we need to take another look at that and find some measure of how bad the occlusion is in each of the views.
Mm-hmm. And now Junfeng Gao is asking what software you use for synthetic image generation, and do you consider the textural features from synthetic images for segmentation?
So we use the Arbaro as an open source program that is an implementation of this procedural generation algorithm I described earlier, and you can find the references in the paper as well for that. And then we imported those into Blender, and we simulated an RGB camera, and then just did some ray tracing onto the models to produce those point clouds. And sorry, I forgot the second half of the question.
Do you consider the textual features from synthetic images for segmentation?
Yeah, so we didn't use any textures here, no colors, no normals even. It was purely the point cloud derived from ray tracing.
Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, we still have 2 minutes. Lorenzo Jamone, what is the average quality / density of the point clouds that you can get in your specific real world scenario? For example, how many points for each plant or leaf?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. So I can tell you what we simulated, but in the real world, as I said, I've just received the new sensor equipment last week, and we're just testing it out now. So I don't actually have the numbers on that yet. I've just put this example here as a rough idea. And this plant was about 20 centimeters tall, if that gives you any idea. Sorry, I don't have the numbers yet.
Yeah, maybe we can translate, transport that question into Discord. Maybe you can discuss it there later.
Sure.
Okay. And Salvador Pacheco is asking, thanks for the talk, very interesting. After detection of a certain crop, what is the next step, or how this information will be used? Is detection and processing expected to be conducted in real time?
Hopefully, yes. So once trained, the network is actually not very heavy to use. So it does process pretty quickly. And we're thinking once we have the organs of the plant located, that gives us tons of information, such as a leaf area can be computed or volumes can be estimated, which are really relevant phenotypic plant traits that could tell us something about the health of the plant, the growth process of the plant. So it can be directly used for actual crop care. But also we think if we take these pictures in the field and we keep a log of them, having a data set like that, maybe also capturing data over time, just capturing data in the field would be insanely helpful to understand the relationships of crop and environment and diseases and so on. So I feel like there are tons of applications where we can go with this.
Thank you, Karoline. I think that's everything regarding the questions. Please, the rest of the participants who has asked the question, please do it in Discord. So Karoline, I'm sure she will be happy to answer them there.
Of course.
Thank you very much.